Senator Alex Padilla, I have questions for the Secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your heads off.
How many of our ICE agents have been doxxed for doing their duty, how they have been targeted.
We're used to seeing protesters disrupt press conferences, right? Not members of government disrupting a government press conference, but that's the situation at the moment. That's how hot the political environment is. And like I mentioned earlier, it's really an indication of the friction that exists right now between the Democrats of California and the Republicans of the federal government. So Kristi Noem, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, was leading this press conference today where she was talking about the ICE raids and the success of them and vowing that they will continue, and she used the words that she wants to, quote, liberate Los Angeles. So the work is going to continue. But that's when you had this interjection from a Democrat Californian Senator Alex Padilla, who tried to ask some questions without indicating who he was, and it led to this moment.
I'm Senator Alex Padilla. I have questions for the Secretary, because the fact of the matter is a half a dozen violent criminals that you're rotating on your heads off.
The problem was he started walking towards the podium where Kristi Noem was speaking, but no one knew who he was. He didn't identify himself, and then he just started shouting his questions. So the authorities there obviously thought he was an unknown. He was tackled to the ground. He was handcuffed. But Kristi Noem, she called this a stunt because she said, look, he's a member of government. He could have just booked a private meeting, which she would have conducted, and which they ultimately did anyway. So that's why she referred to it as a stunt. But here's what the senator used to explain himself after that moment, and then Kristi Noem's response to that. Let's run that.
I was there peacefully. At one point, I had a question, and so I began to ask a question. I was almost immediately forcibly removed from the room. I was forced to the ground, and I was handcuffed. If this is how the Department of Homeland Security responds to a senator with a question, you can only imagine what they're doing to farm workers, to cooks, to day laborers out in the Los Angeles community and throughout California and throughout the country.
He was never arrested, and nobody knew who he was when he came into the room creating a scene. He was removed from the room, and yes, they started to put handcuffs on him when he finally identified himself, and then that was stopped. They said he wants to talk to you. I said, sure, I'd love to sit down and visit. So we went to a room and visited for 10 or 15 minutes.
So that has become a pretty hot political moment. Everyone's had their say from coast to coast on that particular moment today. But it did overshadow what was a press conference and an update from the immigration officials, not just from the government, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, but also members of ICE, members of the FBI, members of Border Control, and they were talking up their achievements in moving on who they say has been some pretty nasty people.
We have a wanted man from Mexico who fled and hid in Los Angeles for killing a woman. You have an MS-13 gang member who killed 2 individuals during a botched catalytic converter theft ring case. These aren't the individuals you want in Los Angeles. These aren't the individuals you want in the United States. We will continue enforcing the immigration mission that President Trump and the American people expect us to do.
So what we've got here, Laura, I just want to let you know where we are. We are outside the federal detention facility in downtown LA. It's been, as I've been explaining, really ground zero for protests that have taken place. They start off, you know, in a pretty calm manner, but then as we get to about now, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, we're a few hours away from the curfew beginning, things start to heat up a bit. And this is just one of many protests that are taking place today. And there's also potentially a big consequence that could happen on the weekend, because you've got these huge protests that have been organised by what's known as No Kings. And they're organising protests to take place all across the United States this weekend to coincide with that big military parade in Washington, D.C. Now, Donald Trump was asked about that today, how he felt about these No King parades, and this was his response.
I don't feel like a king. I have to go through hell to get stuff approved. A king would say, I'm not going to get this. A king would have never had the California mandate to even be talking to him. No, we're not a king. We're not a king at all.